My life as a psychopath. The word psychopath, like many words associated with mental and personality disorders, is used broadly, and often incorrectly. Colloquially, we might call someone who lies a lot a psychopath, just as we might call someone who texts us more frequently than we want crazy. The word psychopath is also routinely used to describe serial killers, though not all serial mass murderers have psychopathic personalities. And while sociopath is sometimes, mistakenly, used interchangeably with psychopath, only the latter is rigorously defined and clinically accepted, says Craig Newman, a professor of clinical psychology at the University of North Texas whose singular research focus has been the psychopathic personality and its traits. According to Newman, the true definition of psychopath is actually pretty narrow. Broadly speaking, psychopathy refers to a pathological personality style that is interpersonally deceptive, effectively cold, behaviorally reckless, and often overtly antisocial, he writes. To qualify, he says, a person must possess traits pertaining to each of four domains: interpersonal, affective, lifestyle, and antisocial. The corresponding traits are as follows. Interpersonal, they're manipulative, deceitful, and/or narcissistic. Affective, they lack remorse, are callous, and may take pleasure in hurting others. Lifestyle, they're impulsive, may use illegal substances, and may have disregard for the consequences of their actions. Antisocial, they are physically aggressive and may have a history of or tendency toward criminal behavior. Importantly, Newman notes, psychopathy is a scale. It's not that you're either a psychopath or not, he says. In the same way someone can have severe depression, but it's also possible for someone to have mild or moderate depression. Newman uses the example of professional poker players. They might be deceitful and narcissistic, but they're probably not psychopaths. Similarly, he takes issue with neuroscientist James Fallon's calling himself a psychopath because his brain imaging profile matched that of psychopathic individuals. Just because the amygdala shows hypoactivation does not make you a psychopath, says Newman. This is a characteristic that's associated with psychopathy, but biology is not destiny. We believe that the syndrome, the personality disorder, is a coming together of these four major domains. While certain people may possess a few, or even most of the psychopathic characteristics, like superficial charm, sexual promiscuity, and early behavioral problems, to name a few, listed on the psychopathy checklist, the PCLR, another tool used in the diagnostic process, unless they fulfill each of the four domains, Newman doesn't consider them truly psychopathic. The max score on the PCLR is a 40, but to reach 30 is really going to be up there, he says. Most people score between a 1 and a 3, he adds. But the point I'm trying to make here is that even people who are 25, 26, they don't quite reach the diagnostic threshold. Even people who are 16, 17, 18 on the PCLR are nasty sons of bitches. Do they meet the diagnostic threshold of what we would call meeting a diagnosis of psychopathy? No. Newman hasn't met or spoken to the subject of the following interview, but he did offer some potential disclaimers when I described the nature of our conversation. These people dissimulate, they lie quite regularly, so it's a challenging interview to do, he says. And most individuals at very high levels of psychopathy are not going to submit to an interview. He's also insistent that psychopaths are inherently and evidently unpleasant to be around. One of the essences of personality pathology is you usually feel it in your gut first. Would I get in a car with this person and drive across the United States? And if you say, oh, hell no, that gives you a clue that there's something off in terms of personality, he says. The woman I spoke to, who will remain anonymous, says she was diagnosed as a psychopath in her mid-20s, and the diagnostic process she describes appears to be in line with what Newman says is required. That said, our conversation was under an hour, and I am not a psychologist. That conversation, which has been edited for length, is below. When were you diagnosed as a psychopath? From age 26 to 27. I went through the whole diagnostic process over several months. There were a certain number of doctors that were involved, and a lot of testing, neuropsych testing, personality testing, brain scans, a lot of different interviews and going through the history of my childhood. It wasn't a quick snap diagnosis. It was something that was arrived at over a decent period of time. What precipitated that decision to start looking into a diagnosis? Well, when I was younger I had some youthful indiscretions that I don't go into. But I had gotten an evaluation as a teenager and had no idea what the result of that was. But when I got a little older, I'd always known my whole life I was quite different in how I trust people, how I thought about things, how I experienced the world. I actually ended up contacting the same doctor who did the first workup. And he remembered me, which I thought was interesting. He said, well, let's just start from scratch, which I was actually interested in doing. I wanted to know, why is my experience so different? Why do I not comprehend the basic interactions that, for other people, it just seems to be natural for them? I had no idea what it was going to evolve into. I didn't know it was going to be months of testing. I think there were a few times where I was ready to not care anymore, but I kept with it for some reason. At the end of it, he was a very smart person. I think he'd probably known someone else that was on the psychopathy spectrum, so he wasn't immediately judgmental. He didn't automatically give me the rundown of criminals, or what a lot of people assume psychopathy to be. He was able to actually talk to me about it. Once he explained it to me, it was, oh, all right, that makes sense. Let's talk about what people get wrong about psychopaths, in your view. Especially now, when there's this huge cultural true crime obsession, I think we have this very particular understanding of what a psychopath means, and it's almost universally someone who's very violent. It's actually not an unreasonable thing, not because it's true, but because of what they're presented with. Most studies done on psychopaths are done on men, in prison or in forensic hospitals, so everything you're going to hear is going to come from a criminal. It's always going to be painted against the backdrop of someone who has committed crimes. They're only out for themselves, they don't care about anyone else. If you interviewed any walk of people, and based their entire profile based on the institutionalized version of that person, like neurotypicals or autistic people, bipolar people, you get a very different picture than if you interviewed them in their general lives. There is also this mistaken thinking that all serial killers are psychopaths, which is just not even remotely true. It's just a myth that won't die. There's a phrase, not all psychopaths are serial killers, but all serial killers are psychopaths. It's just incorrect, but people hear this, and they associate us with serial killers. For some reason, people think we want to kill people. And I think that probably comes from the lack of empathy. People believe that if you have a lack of empathy, that automatically opens a floodgate of antisocial behavior. That's not really how it works. I may not care, I may not have an emotional reaction to someone's pain, but that doesn't mean that I'm going out of my way to cause pain. It just means that I don't have that emotional response. In a day-to-day sense, or in your interpersonal relationships with people, is empathy or attempted empathy something you've had to teach yourself in order to relate to other people? How does that work? Well, we have cognitive empathy. So if your mother died, I can look at you, I can see that you are in pain. I may not feel the same pain, but I can understand you feel pain, and that series of behaviors usually warrants a certain response, comfort or interaction, engagement. And so it's a matter of honing that over time, and also making sure that I can continually consider that my reaction to things is not how other people experience things. Which is hard, because you sort of go through life with the assumption that everybody experiences it like you do. Do you ever feel afraid? We don't feel fear. We get adrenal responses. When you have adrenaline responses to a car accident, or bungee jumping, or what have you, we'll still get that. But for us, we don't feel the fear, which can be obviously dangerous if you're a little kid, and you don't know you're supposed to be afraid of stuff. We don't process the emotion of fear. It doesn't occur to us. And we can't understand it, either. I mean, we get that you feel something, but we don't get it. How do you perceive it when you hear someone expressing their fear of mortality, or says they're afraid to die someday? That always baffles me, because I can't comprehend why it matters. For me, life is very much in this immediate moment. This moment is all you have, and the fear of it going away is just nonsensical. This is a huge disconnect for me. People explain it in ways that they very much understand. They're afraid of dying, they're afraid of not being important, they're afraid of being forgotten. And none of those things are important to me, so it's sort of like saying I'm afraid of not being the color blue. In your romantic relationship, does that present a challenge as far as talking about values, or knowing what to do when someone wants sympathy from you? Certainly. I've been with my partner for 19 years, and he's been with me through the whole diagnostic process, and it's definitely been a learning curve. He's probably one of the most patient people you will ever meet on the planet. He reads people and he understands people on a level one simply don't. Through learning from him, I actually can apply that back to him, and understand what his needs are. It's always a conscious effort. I know that for a lot of people, their significant other is more important to them than themselves. They think of them first, that sort of thing. That will never be natural for me. I always have to make sure I am manually considering him. There are certainly things that I miss, and it requires me to have to do bi-monthly maintenance. Am I hitting all the marks for you? Do I need to do anything differently? Where am I not fulfilling what you need? And usually he's like, it's fine. To be honest, that sounds like a wise practice for most people. I think a lot of people take it for granted that the other person knows where they're at. I agree with you. I call it cognitive love. And it's investment. You have to make that investment, you have to make the time, you have to take the other person into consideration all the time. It's important. His needs are on the same level as mine, which, if you knew me, you would know that that's very, very rare. When you say cognitive love, does that mean you don't feel that sort of romantic roller coaster feeling that other people describe to you? Well, no, I don't. Certainly attraction. I feel attraction, and he's very attractive. But psychopaths don't process oxytocin like neurotypicals do. What oxytocin contributes to in your brain is chemical love, so that feeling of a roller coaster. Bonding is another one we don't have. You bond to your significant other, you bond to your children, you bond to your pets. There's also trust, which is a weird one, because I didn't know oxytocin had anything to do with trust. Most people feel trust as an actual emotion. I never knew that. To me, trust was always, you show me how you're going to behave, and I will determine whether or not I want you around. I always knew I didn't trust people, and I always had a disconnect, because I didn't know it was a chemical reaction for most people. I didn't have an explanation as to why I didn't trust people, but then I started digging into oxytocin. It made sense. A lot of people think of psychopaths as having a very flat emotional affect, and I know we haven't talked for long, but that's not my impression of you. You obviously have a personality, and a distinctive way of speaking, and so I wonder what your experience is with that perception. People think we have no emotion, which is absolutely not true. We just feel them way turned down. If most people feel an emotion between 7 and 8 on a dial of 10, I feel it between 0 and 2. Negative emotions are background noise. We can't tune into that frequency because our brains just don't process enough information for them to ever be loud enough to feel or direct behavior. We enjoy things, get excited about things, like adrenaline, That's great. I laugh with people, I enjoy intellectual discussions. A lower functioning psychopath probably wouldn't enjoy intellectual conversation. They'd rather go and rob a liquor store. But that's why they spend most of their lives in prison. Do you feel at all that your psychopathy is an advantage to you? Do you feel lucky in any sense? No, it's not an advantage, because all neurotypes come with limitations, don't they? With psychopathy I constantly have to figure out people, and why they do what they do, and how to respond to them. Normal people have to deal with grief and loss and pain and heartbreak, but they also have things to make them happy. I think people are pretty wired the way they're meant to be. I don't know that it's necessarily an advantage or disadvantage, it's just what you make of it. I could easily take psychopathy and make it a terribly negative thing for both me and the world, because I could make bad choices and do terrible things. I could do that, but that's not who I have any interest in being. Anyone can make bad choices for themselves. Do you still see the doctor who diagnosed you, or do you sort of have any regular treatment that you do? It's completely self-managed at this point. There's really nothing to manage. I learn about it by reading studies. I haven't spoken to that doctor since back when I got the diagnosis. It was pretty much, "Thank you very much," and that was the end of that. We never spoke again. And you don't take any medication for it, right? No, it's just a variant brain structure. And actually we respond very differently to medications as well, because our chemistry is different, so you can expect strange medication reactions. I've been dealing with that. Whenever a doctor prescribes the medication, I can pretty well expect it to not work as intended. Does that apply to something as innocuous as a cold medication? Yeah. Sometimes cold medicines work for things like decongestants, but things like pain medication, I've never experienced the high that other people get. I have no comprehension of why people enjoy opioids. We also can't get addicted to things because of the way our brain works. There are psychopaths that use drugs, but you can cut them off cold turkey and they will not have any withdrawal. They don't have any cravings, and they can just go on with their day like it was nothing. That's another weird chemical processing. So we just lack certain normal cues that other people have. Online you're very out as far as being a psychopath, but is it something that a lot of people in your personal life know? Or your family? No, they have no idea, and I'm going to keep it that way. Do you have a relationship with your parents? Yeah, they're great people. They don't know. They had a really difficult child to raise in me, and I've gotten older, and to them, I've matured into the daughter that they always wanted. I don't really see a need to change their perceptions of things. They know me for what they need to know me for. Trying to explain psychopathy to people, especially older people, is really difficult.